Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. As we wait for folks to gather themselves, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name. Tell us where you're from. Let's see who's coming through. And we're going to start in a few minutes. All right, I'm seeing some familiar faces. Hey, Jerry, good to see you. Yeah, and as more folks are coming in, thanks again for joining. We're going to get started in a few minutes, let people trickle in, but please use the chat. Tell us your name and tell us where you're coming from. Nice. We got folks from all over the country. Looks like folks from Philly, from New York, Colorado, from Maryland. It's exciting. For folks still trickling in, we're going to give it just a few minutes for folks to hop in. Please let us know where you're coming from and your name. Introduce yourselves into the chat before we get started. All right, excellent. I just love seeing all the representation that we got in the chat in this meeting right now. That's super exciting, right? We've got time zones in here. So yeah, thanks. Folks who are still coming in, feel free to introduce yourselves into the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. But we're going to go ahead and get started. Just as a couple of quick reminders, in case folks would like closed captioning, that is available. You should see at the bottom of your screen a little button that says captions. If you click that, then you'll see text to voice, which will help make it more accessible to you. And I also wanted to just really quick remind folks, this is a comradely space. We're all great comrades here working to build a better world. If we do see some discourteous behavior, we will ask for folks to be removed from the webinar, but I don't think that's going to be an issue, but just had to make sure that that's mentioned. So thank you all. As folks come in, please keep sharing your name and where you're from into the chat. And just as a quick disclaimer, this is a panel that's not about election campaigns, but it's about organizing groups and public officials doing work to advance policy and an agenda there. So welcome, everybody. Very quickly, my name is Diego Morales. I'll get to that more in just a moment. Welcome to the 5th event in the DSA Funds series, How We Win. So this is a series that, if you're familiar with, is focused on sharing lessons and how-to experiences from local policy campaigns and organizing that's happening around the country, and discussing how democratic socialists and organizers and coalitions can advance and achieve tangible wins that support our economic and our social goals. So tonight, we'll get an inside look from organizers and public officials working to win policy change in Chicago, where I'm from Montgomery County, Maryland, from Berkeley, California, and New York. And so the questions that we're trying to ask is, how can organizers and public officials harness our collective power and leverage the public policy process to advance socialist goals? So we're going to have panelists talking about the strategies that have worked, the different challenges that they've faced, and obstacles, how they've moved beyond those, and the path forward to building strong governing coalitions between local organizers and public officials. So just to introduce everybody a little bit. So again, my name is Diego Morales, pronounced he, him. I'm a community organizer that's based in Chicago. I'm currently the campaign coordinator for the Lift the Ban on rent control in Illinois. I'm also an expansion project manager for a limited equity housing co-op called the Pilsen Housing Cooperative. And I have some experience winning some local campaigns and working in city council in Chicago. So I'm excited to be here with you all. I'm very excited to share a little bit about our fellow panelists here. Soli Alpert is a proud member of the Berkeley Rent Control Board. He serves as vice chair in Berkeley, California. He became involved in local progressive activism as a student. After Councilmember Kate Harrison's victory, he joined her staff as a part-time legislative assistant. He was elected to the Rent Board in 2018 with the Right to Housing slate. He was first elected vice chair of the Rent Board by his colleagues in 2020 and re-elected in 2021, 2022, and 2023. Lots of consecutive wins there, congrats. He is a member of East Bay DSA. We're also joined by Councilmember Kristin Mink. Kristin Mink is a former organizer with the Center for Popular Democracy, now in her first term as a member of the Montgomery County Council in Maryland. She's helped lead the fight to pass rent stabilization last year, working with housing activists, including members of her DSA chapter, Metro DC DSA. She's a first-generation Chinese American, born and raised in Montgomery County. Thanks for joining us, Councilmember Kristin. We're also joined by Representative Assemblymember Marcela Mitaynes. Assemblymember Marcela represents Brooklyn in the New York State Assembly. Marcela migrated to New York City from Peru as a child with her family and was raised in Sunset Park, Brooklyn. She's now raising her own family in that same vibrant, beautiful community. Through her work with Neighbors Helping Neighbors and with tenants throughout New York State, Marcela was instrumental in the passage of the historic Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. Shout out. She is a member of South Brooklyn DSA branch. So thank you again, everybody, for joining such an incredible array of experiences and panelists that we have here. Super excited. Just really quickly, want to mention that for the first half of our discussion, we're going to center on questions, pre-prepared questions that I'm going to ask the panelists as a moderator. And in the second half, we're going to open it up a little bit for you all, the attendees, to ask questions of yourself. So once we get to that portion, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to post your questions as they come to you during this discussion. So as we talk, feel free to shoot your questions in, and when we get to that section, we'll get through that. So again, for folks who are just joining, thank you for joining. Please introduce yourself in the chat with your name and where you're coming from. All right, so we were going to start with our questions here. So this is called the How We Win series, right? So the idea behind How We Win is that building working class power requires not just organizing our communities, but also following through to policy adoption and implementation. Reflecting on your own communities, what is one priority you are currently working to win on housing at the local or state level? Tell us about the issue and its status in your government body. What strategies have worked so far, and what are the challenges and obstacles that you faced in your work on housing? And why don't we go first with Councilmember Kristin?
Thanks a lot, Diego. So glad to be with you all tonight. And this is a great series, and I'm really glad to be part of it. So the two things that I'll mention. One is that we're working really hard on passing tenant protection measures. My district in particular, we have a lot of renters, a lot of rental properties, and unfortunately some slumlords who have been around for many, many years and have just truly been a nightmare. And so there's one in particular that's truly the bane of my existence. And so I've been working to make myself the bane of theirs. And I'm a huge believer in canvassing. So we started off canvassing that whole building 3 buildings, really. It's a really large property, and making sure that I'm a huge believer in canvassing, so I'm sure I'll come back to that other times as well. But my team and I, we canvassed the building. We worked with volunteers, other housing advocates in the area. We made sure that we had, multiple languages available, just connecting with people, saying, what's working, what's not working. That was really the seed, that kind of connection of building first, like really a lot of communication between tenants and our office, but as well as, helping to strengthen those connections with local advocates as well and the tenants. Progressive Maryland then moved in at that point and started working to formalize a tenants association there. And so we worked very closely with them to help make sure that, anytime there was an issue that was raised to the organizers of the tenants association, we were helping to address it on the constituent side, going to complain to the landlords and the ownership. And so making sure that information flow was happening, and that helped to show how powerful the tenants association was. We have some state bills that the Maryland state session just wrapped up. So I worked to pull in that tenants association, who's all these now like new, fresh organizers. We're not organizers before, and now they very much are. And helps to move them into community with the state organizing coalition, housing coalition, where they got to see some success. We just got some really great housing bills passed at the state level. So it's great to see them secure that win. We're still working to pass county level measures, trying to figure out really what is the strategy for holding landlords accountable effectively. What we have seen is that citations do not work because they just go to the courts and they die there. Judges cut those fines in half. They say, it seems like you've gotten the same fine, 800 times. It's really just the same fine. Let's just give it to you the one time, that sort of thing. Or in the end, maybe they'll pay one thing and then the thing will immediately, they'll fix it. It'll immediately break again. I mean, it's just an ongoing cycle. So this particular building, they've put it up for sale now. So that's a good thing. And we're working to make sure that to try to make sure that whoever buys it is someone who's not going to displace those folks that they're going to build on and then move people and renovate, and that whole situation. But it's a lot of moving pieces, but I think that all of those pieces are worth mentioning because it all started with the canvassing and with the organizing and with helping the local residents to feel empowered and feel a connection to both folks in government as well as on the ground, and those pieces really working in symbiosis. And I'll mention also on the rent stabilization bill that we passed at the county level last year, we're working to get the regulations for that passed right now. But that was also a huge testament to the power of organizing and people power, because what happened with that bill was, we worked to kind of get those pieces teed up before coming into office, to doing a lot of the research and so on, and also hoping to have a number of the votes in place as we all got sworn in. And one of the folks who we thought was going to help us to introduce the bill around the time that we were getting ready to introduce it popped up with another bill with a much higher rent cap, so high that it was not a rent cap. I'm sure you've seen those before. And so we had to very quickly pivot, make sure that those two bills got introduced on the same day and really change our strategy. The opposing bill was introduced with a majority of the council signed onto it. And so clearly they thought that they had already won, and it took significant organizing, door knocking in other people's districts, a huge educational campaign for the public to explain the difference, because now between the two bills, because now we had a very confusing situation as well, making sure that we were operating in multiple languages. And this was really just a public information campaign at that point, and a tenant empowerment campaign. And long story short, the other bill passed, amended into essentially our bill. So that was a huge win for our side. They passed, and then they eventually changed the name of it as one of the final amendments because they're at the end. So huge win for people power in that one. Fundamentally, it all came back to organizing.
Thank you so much, Kristin. How about Commissioner Soli?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm always a little bit, I feel out of class when I'm on a panel with folks from Chicago and New York and the DC area. And then here we got little Berkeley, 120,000. But, we like to punch above our weight. And so, one of the ways right now, Berkeley adopted rent control a long time ago. We've had strong rent control. In fact, in California for a long time, strong rent control was known as Berkeley style rent control before the state fucked us and restricted the strength of Berkeley's rent control. But because because our rent control ordinance is so old, it's in a lot of ways been surpassed by more modern ordinances that have been passed more recently or updated more recently in places like Berkeley and Richmond and in other places around the state. And also one of the unique things in Berkeley is that our rent control is adopted by the voters through the California local initiative system, which means that whenever we want to change our rent control, it has to go to the ballot and be approved by the voters. So we can't, even if we wanted to, just get council to pass it by itself. We have to go to the voters and win a campaign. And so for the past decade, the kind of white whale of tenant organizers in Berkeley has been golden duplexes, this special category of duplexes, which are, for arcane reasons I won't totally get into, it's not worth your time, exempt from rent and eviction control, unlike other duplexes in our city. And we've tried for many cycles now to get that exemption repealed. And we tried to get it through the council, a council which was supposedly a progressive majority council, a tenant-friendly council. But even then, we still were not able to get the votes to put that on the ballot, that repeal of that golden duplex status, that exemption for these units. And so this time around, instead of going to the council to have them put the legislation on the ballot, we're trying to gather signatures to get it on the ballot directly. And the coalition, that I'll drop a link actually in the chat about that. It's eastbaytenantsunion.com, but it's also right2organize.org. That we are in coalition, the Berkeley Tenants Union, East Bay DSA, and then a number of labor unions, SEIU 10-1 and the United Auto Workers, which represent the student workers at Cal. We're working together on a ballot measure that will basically bring Berkeley's rent control into the 21st century, close a lot of exemptions to rent control, strengthen eviction protections, and also notably, and this is maybe relevant for some of you all around the country, give tenants the right to form tenant associations that have the real power to meet and confer with their landlords. And so what this would, we actually heard from the folks on campus, the student workers, they had a historic, massive strike in the UC system, the biggest strike in California history, I believe, or at least in many, many decades. And they came out of that strike and they told us, hey, we've got all these, graduate student workers who are kind of accidentally forming tenant unions because now they have the bug. They're organizers now, and they keep on talking to their neighbors, and then, oh, wait, now they have a tenant union, but they don't know what to do. And so they came to us asking for us to put in place rules and power to really make sure that tenant unions could have a seat at the table with their landlord. And so we're in the last month of that push. The next month I'll be hitting a lot of doors, like Kristin was saying. It's all about door knocking. And so we're going to be gathering those signatures to get them on the ballot. And unfortunately, of course, the landlords in Berkeley have put their own measure on the ballot. And they paid signature gatherers, the same signature gatherers who are gathering signatures to recall our progressive elected leaders in California and pass legislation that they're always lying and saying it's going to help people, but then it really hurts them. And their legislation, they say, is to protect tenants, but will strip the rent board of powers to enforce habitability standards for tenants. So we have a two-sided fight here. We have to both defeat this Trojan horse measure that claims to give more protections to tenants, but it actually is going to make it harder for the rent board to keep tenants safe, and also pass our measure, which will give tenants the right to organize and extend protections to new tenants.
It's exciting. So I'm hearing a lot of knocking on doors and collecting signatures. I feel like there's a theme that's maybe building here. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Let's go over to Representative Marcela.
Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. Exciting to hear what's happening in other places. Yeah, I'm at the last week of session and we were pushing really hard for 3 bills to make a huge difference in the housing, this housing problem that we're having. One of them was my bill, but we came up really, really short, and that's really frustrating. But one of them was good cause eviction, which would give protection to tenants that don't currently have it, right, and limit the rent increases. That was a big, big, big push from my office, even though it wasn't my bill. HAVP, which is a rental subsidy, again, very, very needed. Also wasn't my bill, but was working super hard, and was hoping to have my bill, which is TOPA, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, to somehow make it through. But we didn't. The word or the rumor about the HAVP and the rental subsidy is that the New York State governor didn't want to give the tenants 2 wins. one win is enough with good cause eviction. Is that true or not? I don't know. But the good cause eviction was very, very watered down to the point that I personally could not vote for it. It was in a package of bills that's called the Big Ugly with really, really good things, and they do that on purpose. And not only was the good cause eviction really watered down, for my district in particular, it would not have helped. They did too many carves out. It's honestly very, very confusing. So this is actually going to tie up more of our housing court because people are just going to have to go to court to make a determination if they even are protected or not. And then to make matters worse, they are the real estate industry, with the governor's help, is really starting to chip away of all the advances we did in 2019. And part of that was bringing back the individual apartment improvements because according to the landlords, they don't have the money to fix up the apartments, and now they're holding them, right? And we need to rent them. So very, very disappointing. I went super hard for this. It's really important that the offices also like work. So office work was making sure people knew and connecting them to the legislation that actually could improve them as they're coming in and asking, why is it that my landlord can double my rent, or why is it that my landlord can evict me when I've been paying my rent on time and I'm a good tenant? Like, this doesn't make sense. And I said, yeah, I totally agree. Can you sign this petition? Do you want to send this postcard, right? So that included us being out in the community and talking to folks, because the assembly legislators that border my district, right, were not supportive of good cause. And I've done so much work in the community, so many buildings that I've organized, that we were able to use that to tap into those folks to get and build pressure to get our colleagues to kind of like come on board. But I say that because it's also a reminder that we live in a capitalist society where they prioritize property owners over tenants, right? Like, this is what we're up against, right? This is always going to be a fight. And so I can't expect, the real estate and the governor are negotiating at the table together, and then they're coming back to us as legislators asking for changes, right? Like, this is the reality of what we're up against. And so a lot of work to do. I know that this year was somewhat demoralizing, but a reminder that if we are not in these spaces and we are not fighting and we are not pushing back on the real estate and capitalist agenda and do nothing, then they're going to completely sweep us by, and that's not something that we can allow to happen. So really excited about the stuff that you guys are doing there, and we're doing our best here as well.
Hello, sorry, I had some technical difficulties there. Happy to be back. Thank you so much. I just wanted to mention, you mentioned punching above your weight, Soli. All y'all have, rent control, and that's amazing. And like, I know it took a lot of time to fight for that. Just really quickly, here in Illinois, we have a rent control ban. There's a majority of U.S. states that have a ban where you're not allowed to regulate rents whatsoever. And so we've been fighting to lift that ban, hence our name. And, it's interesting, of course, hearing the common denominator of the importance of canvassing and talking with people and knocking on doors, because the sort of state of our legislation right now is like, well, let's empower people to lift this ban on rent control through the power of referenda and go directly to the people themselves and ask them to decide. So that is, it's kind of where we're trying to catch up to you all at that moment in that sense too. Go ahead, Kristin.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just going to add on the punching above the weight class note there, that Soli actually provided us in Montgomery County with a key report that we needed on the importance of vacancy control, that really validated why it's not only totally fine to have it, but a good thing to have. And we like use the shit out of that report, and we're still using it at the state level. It's very hard to combat. So that really, just much appreciation, and so glad to have this community where we're able to turn to each other for resources like that. It's incredible. I mean, that truly affected the outcome of our legislation.
Teamwork. Thank you, Wallace. Go ahead, Marcela.
Yeah, I just wanted to add and highlight the fact that part of the good cause eviction, it only pertained to the city, and then upstate was left to opt in themselves. Some of the pushback that we do sometimes helps, not too much, but we have to keep fighting. And so one thing that we were able to change in the legislation to make it easier for upstate was that if they were going to opt in, that they would not opt in to the really bad language and regulations that the city had, but that they should have the right to opt in and actually create their own restrictions if they so choose it. So somebody pointed out in the chat, which I want to highlight again, we have to make sure that we're elevating our small victories. And so Albany just passed a good cause bill on Monday. So that's really great, but a lot of work that we still need to do. It would have been great to just have a blanket protection for tenants, something simple that we can all understand. But this just means we have to keep working, and we have to continue to build on what we are with.
Absolutely, good shout. And it sounds like there's some wins all across that we're all talking about here. So we got some momentum, I think, across the country. It's great to hear about those victories. Go ahead, Commissioner Soli.
Yeah, I just wanted to, thank you, Kristin, for the shout out, and Diego, what you were saying, both what you were saying. I think folks don't always know, one of the first kind of corporate wide-scale cookie cutter bills that was passed across this country at the state level. And a lot of folks are familiar with ALEC now, right? The kind of evil corporate state lobby group that gives all these conservative legislators the same bill to pass in each state. And one of the first successes pre-ALEC of that kind of effort was rent control bans. That rent control bans spread like wildfire across the state, across the country, and now most states have rent control bans. And I think that shows just how important organizing is on their side, but also how important organizing cross-state is on our side, right? When we can work together in New York, people in DC and New York and across the country can take information we have on the West Coast and bring it off to the East Coast. We're all able, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. That each of us have different expertises, right? Like DC has had TOPA, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, for decades now, and now we're using their example to try and pass it in Berkeley, unsuccessfully so far, but we're still trying. Same in New York. And so, yeah, we all have different successes that have taken root in our communities first. And having forums like this and forums like, like the DSA Fund generally, and these kind of networks that connect us, make it so much easier for us to show success and where to start.
Yeah, I just want to double down on that. The fact that DSA funding of these organizations that are national is such a huge boon. Just a small quick shout out on that. I know Chicago actually recently passed a $1 billion social housing bond that's actually was heavily inspired by what happened in Montgomery County not too long ago as well, with the social housing project that's happening there. So I mean, things are changing, things are happening, and it's the connections that we're making that are really a huge part of that. I'll go ahead and move us on to our next question, because I think very key and central to like the wins, right? It's like how we get there and what is the sort of vehicle that's necessary in order to achieve these sorts of things. And so the question that I'd like to pose to you all is, what are the kind of coalitions that you are working with, and especially like coalitions are dynamic vehicles, right? So what are the things, what are the sort of glues that help keep them together? What are the sort of obstacles that contribute to division that you have to work through? What does that look like in the work that you do? And how about let's start with you, Commissioner Soli.
Yeah, so I can't remember. I don't think I mentioned this before at the top, but Berkeley's rent board is an elected body, and we are one of only 2 elected rent boards in the country. The other one is in Santa Monica, California. So every rent board in California, or pretty much every jurisdiction, or most jurisdictions in the state that have rent control, which we have at the local level, have a rent board, but only our 2 are elected. And one of the really amazing things about Berkeley's rent board is we've had a tenant supermajority, or usually unanimous control of our rent board for more than 20 years. And part of the reason why is that ever since 1994, there's been a tenant convention in Berkeley before every election that nominates a pro-renter, pro-rent control slate to run for the board. That will usually be mostly renter, but it'll include pro-tenant homeowners as well. And so that coalition has expanded over the years. Now it includes SEIU 10-1, which represents workers at the city of Berkeley. It includes East Bay DSA, YDSA, the Cal Berkeley Democrats, local progressive organizations, the Berkeley Tenants Union, the Gray Panthers, representing senior folks, and some neighborhood groups, particularly African American neighborhood associations. And so that coalition, because it's an at-large election, has been able to elect every single seat. We've won every single seat on the board except for 2 since 1994 in every election. And so that doesn't mean we win all the time, though, right? It's easy, it's one thing to get elected, but all of these groups may agree on rent control as a narrow issue, but there's differences of opinion even within there. And that's, I think, often we see that within labor, right? That in concept, the labor movement is broadly in support of rent control, but of course we run into divisions with the building trades who have mixed opinions, and then even then there's differences of opinion around development, right? And the role of for-profit development within what the role of for-profit development should be. And so I think one of the barriers that we've seen, particularly around this ballot measure, is just that our coalitions have been kind of fractured by other things going on. That this ballot measure was not the focus of our organizing for the past few months. We had 2 different special elections in Berkeley for our city council, and then we had major labor actions going on in Palestine, solidarity work going on, and so that's all kind of all that's great and important work, of course, but it's also kind of divided our attention, and so it's been it's kind of been a struggle. And so I think one of the things that we've seen is we're more effective when we can make the tenant organizing work build towards coalition rather than divide us, right? So when other things are, it's kind of seems obvious, right? But if the tenant work we're doing also brings everyone closer around our other work, it's even better. So when the tenant work we're doing also provides a platform for labor to help, the workers at the rent board, our union members, they're members of SEIU 10-1. And so when our tenant organizing work also provides a platform for our workers to make sure their rights are being upheld and their work standards are being respected, that invests the union even more in our tenant organizing. Whereas if we're just asking them to pitch into the tenant work but not paying attention to their needs around labor and working conditions, it's asking more than we're taking. And so that kind of coalitional building, and that doesn't mean we're doing it perfectly. We're still in the model of having that those conventions happen every 2 years. And one of the things that I think lots of folks have been interested in, but has not yet happened, is having that be an ongoing, process that happens every few months, so that we can stay in touch outside of the election season. Because we've been really good at electing commissioners, and then not as effective in the past decade at passing the legislation we need to see at the council. And in terms of, one part of that I didn't answer. In terms of the opposition coalition, like everywhere, it's the people who own the property, right? The ownership class is opposing us at every step. We have the Berkeley Property Owners Association, BPOA, when they're the group running the kind of Trojan horse ballot measure. They're also the group that poured money into my council election, opposing me, of course, quite proudly. But one of the things that has kind of impacted our coalition recently has been the proliferation of ADUs. This is kind of something I don't see talked about all that often. But Berkeley, has been able to be so successful in our rental organizing and our tenant organizing, in part because we're a tenant majority city, but also our, a significant portion of the homeowners in Berkeley are pro-tenant, right? These are a lot of, retired hippies and Cal professors and folks who still, own their homes, but care a lot about tenants' rights and, maybe low income themselves or on fixed income. And as quote unquote ADUs, right, or accessory dwelling units, they call them different things in different places, but granny units or backyard cottages, things like that, have become more popular and more easy to build. What I've seen is some folks have shifted in their mind from just being a homeowner to being a potential future landlord. And so we've lost some of the kind of, not lost, I'll say, but the solidarity we've seen between homeowners and tenants has been shaken by this kind of view that, oh, well, if we pass strong rent control, is that going to impact my ability to retire on my ADU I'm going to build in the backyard? And so that's just, a dynamic that we haven't really figured out we haven't entirely overcome that dynamic yet. That's something we're still navigating as that's become a more recent phenomenon.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. For the sake of time, we may want to limit some of the responses because then we have a lot of really good material on all this stuff. I do think that this question on coalitions is super important, so I wanted to open up to any of the other panelists if you want to chime in. And if possible, make it a little brief so we can make some time for the other questions.
Yeah, I can chime in. I think coalition work is something that we're constantly doing, constantly building those relationships. And I think that we need to understand also that coalition work means that there's different lanes, and sometimes we come together in one lane and sometimes we let people do their thing in their lane because we're all working toward the same outcome. I think that some of the coalition work I particularly did in wanting to move the housing legislation, for example, like Good Cause, was really try and build those relationships with the unions and their union members, right? And talking to them and trying to get them to realize that housing has to be a priority, because by now, over the last couple of years, they're starting to see and realize that their membership is dwindling down because people are being displaced. And if they don't have a secure home, then they will not be able to come out and do organizing work that you need to. So that was like really instrumental in building those relationships and then creating that inside outside relationship where I'm in conference and I'm listening to what some legislators are saying who should be supporting this that aren't, and then I can kind of like reach out to the unions and say, hey, I really need help because they support the Good Cause Eviction Bill too. Can you call X, Y, and Z and try and push them on the bill? And so part of that was also so that the union rep can see how their endorsed candidates are responding to legislation that they very much need. And one of the outcomes, even though we didn't get what we needed, was the fact that, you know, this union called me and was very appreciative of the way that we worked, had not worked with other members in the past in the way that I worked, but also said that they were going to go back to their legislative group and say, have a discussion because this is an election year now, and talk about redoing the questionnaire in a way that they want more commitment from their members. And I think that that was huge because this is a David and Goliath fight, right, between the real estate industry and tenants. But one other thing that came out, there was a bit of some controversy with a group that's more aligned and identified with the real estate industry, who actually had come out publicly and supported the Good Cause Eviction. And so there was some pushback about whether we should be working together or not. I think some members of the coalition really got upset to understand who they were and what they stood for. And there was also just confusion. But I think in certain situations, there may be opportunities to come together for a larger fight, but then we need to understand who we're bringing into the coalition space and how we're working with them, because it might be an opportunity to join forces to come to an outcome, but then after that, we still have opposing views.
Yeah, similarly, I'm always looking for whose vote do I need and which groups are they moved by? Who's their constituency, really? Who are they, you know, touting on social media? Who are they meeting with a lot? Who are they introducing legislation for? And then how can I bring that organization or that coalition into, you know, the bill that I'm trying to pass? Now, for the rent stabilization fight last year, that was, you know, because a majority already had signed on to the opposing bill. That was like, we needed to be firing on all cylinders. So, I mean, we reached out to every coalition that we could possibly think of to explain how their issue was intricately tied to this particular bill, and our bill had to be the one that passed. But I mean, that's a legitimate fight. Housing does impact everything. You're talking about public safety. You're talking about climate. I mean, you're talking about immigrant justice. You're talking about gender justice. You're talking about LGBTQIA plus justice. I mean, like, that is housing's legitimate tie-in in all of these spaces. And so, you know, some of those are, you know, an easier conversation to have with some folks than others. But once you're able to have those conversations, now you're in a space where, you know, now you're in coalition together for this issue. Maybe there's future issues that you can work on together, and maybe not, like, you know, like Marcela said. But, you know, the opportunity is there for when it arises. And those relationships are there. And some of those groups I've seen now, without me being involved, have come together to work on other issues together, which is very, very, very cool. We had an organizing a meeting, just kind of a strategy meeting early on when I took office, where we invited a lot of these different groups from all different issue spaces together with, just to kind of everybody share what some of the issues were what was on their mind, and then just kind of mix and mingle and connect. And similar idea there. So that's something that we want to continue to do regularly, because that solidarity, whenever you can find it, whenever you can tap into it, that's the only way that we can get things done.
Yeah, and thank you all so much. I think this question is really crucial, so I just really wanted to chime in, just kind of from an organizer's perspective. I know this is probably the same in all of your jurisdictions, right? But like, this is really important, like who is constitutive of your coalition, and particularly when it comes to like multiracial solidarity. There's a lot of racial politics at play in Chicago and in Illinois that people try to play off each other. Oh, it's just a Chicago problem. What people really mean by that is like, oh, that's just a Black person problem or Black people problem. And conversely, like downstate, that's white people problems issues, right? And it's just been, I want to shout out Manufactured Housing Action because it's been really, really inspiring for me to like build a coalition by like creating opportunities for connection of, say, a Black Section 8 voucher holder who's been kicked out of their apartment because the housing authority can no longer pay for the increased rents, going to a leadership training with, a white working class, mobile homeowner, right? And they try to like paint people who own their mobile homes as homeowners when they may own the structure that they live in, but they actually pay rent on the lot that it sits on. And you see a lot of corporate consolidation happening in that sector, because especially since the pandemic, and like people who vote very differently, who belong to different political parties, who have very different social backgrounds, but then they meet and they're like, oh, like my landlord is just as much of a piece of crap as yours. Yeah, let's get this thing done. And creating those opportunities as an organizer, I encourage people they can be awkward and they can be difficult, but like once, it's been beautiful and eye-opening and such a crucial part of building our coalition, and it's made huge differences as far as how we've gotten further with our legislation. I just wanted to add that. So like I mentioned, for the purposes of time, we're all going to kind of like just like shoot the next questions to one person to get through them. And this was really important. This one's for you, Assemblymember Marcela. How do structures created by DSA chapters and other groups in your local area work to support you and support your staff? And what are the opportunities and challenges with the resources that your office has, or maybe the resources that your office doesn't have?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think one, the budget that we have for staff is really nominal, and it's kind of embarrassing. If we want to be socialist, then we have to walk the walk and talk the talk, right? Which meant that I am making sure that I am doing living wage salaries, which then means I'm only able to get less staff. That is what it is. But I think that the local branch's work is like really, really important and does need to work and does need to work together. I try to make sure that I try to attend as many meetings of the monthly meetings that they have, to keep them kind of like up to date on what's happening, kind of get their feedback on things. But they also provide support at a time when I don't have like staff that's needed. And I'll give you an example right now where New York City has just opened up the wait list for the Section 8 vouchers, which is a federal program. This list has not been opened up in 15 years. This is very much desperately needed, but unfortunately, it's a lottery system. But if folks want to be lucky, they have to apply. So not only did I instruct staff to do nothing but NYCHA applications this whole week, that meant that we needed to call in volunteers. And that's where the office has been super helpful, and just having people and laptops, and they're using the internet in the office. It's 10 minutes to do the application, but we made a huge push to get people to kind of like know that this is happening so that we can help them. And so that's one example of the way that we work together. Funneling information back and forth about like what's happening during the budget season when I need them to kind of like do a call to action. There's things that we plan together and focus around, right? Trying to get more people involved in what we're doing. And, again, talking about the Good Cause Eviction bill, when we were trying to get, supporters, the fact that they can also come in and kind of like help do the people power and get out there. And then, it's also great when I can like hire somebody within that group. There's also being in the legislature, we have committees and there's a bunch of like bills that come before us. And, I currently don't have a legislative director, but in New York, what we've done was created an infrastructure of volunteers that will come and look at the legislation that's being proposed within the committees, and they kind of like do their research, and then they kind of do recommendations so that, this happens on Friday, I get it on Monday, and I'm reviewing it with my team as we move forward and decide how to vote based on the research and stuff that was done. And so all this infrastructure really makes us look like we're smart, like we're on top of things, we're asking really good questions, and none of that can be done without the volunteer support that we have.
That's really wonderful. And that's a great, I remember seeing the announcement for the NYCHA applications opening up. That's huge. We need that here in Chicago too. And I kind of wanted to switch this one around a little bit, if you don't mind, but maybe for Councilmember Kristin, I wanted to ask, given that now that you have some experience in office, how does your experience now compare with your expectations before when you were fighting to achieve your seat? What did you not expect, or what didn't you? How was it different? And then,
I mean, that's quite a can of worms there, Diego.
And from that, what are your reflections now on the necessary roles that elected officials have and organizations have in holding those roles together?
So having been an organizer, I was with the Center for Popular Democracy before, mostly doing stuff on the Hill, organized lots of protests and, marches and constituent visits and that sort of thing, but mostly on federal work. And so coming into office, I think the job itself is actually very similar to what I expected, because I have, we've all organized with people on the inside who are good at organizing and who want to organize, right? You've got people who are good at strategy and who will like work with you on, policy building and so on. And so I wanted to, come into the seat so that I had the opportunity to leverage that seat to basically bring, the organizing world into the office, which is what we did. Most of my office is organizers also. And so having seen that, it was not that different from what I expected in terms of like, what are we really doing here? Some of the differences though have been local versus that federal work. I mean, like, I'll organize a protest at Manchin's yacht or whatever. That's not a good strategy for trying to move one of my colleagues, right? That, going and protesting or bird dogging, at that point, you're not winning that vote. Most likely what you're doing is you're getting publicity to move public opinion so that you can shift the Overton window, maybe you move somebody else's vote. When you're at the local level, like these fights are winnable in Montgomery County, but it's all Democratic here. Now, obviously everybody has to run as a Democrat. You end up with a range of Democrats who are sitting in the seats, but like fights are winnable here. And people get really pissed off from protesting at the federal level and at the local level. So I don't want to use that as a standard for like, you shouldn't protest. But when there's other strategies that are lower on the escalation list, no matter what level of government you're at, right? You want to do gradual escalation so that you can do what works. And so trying to be really thoughtful, like I'm on the inside, so I'm not making escalation decisions, right? That's entirely the purview of folks who are on the outside. So that's one thing that's different, right? Is that's entirely out of my hands, and I kind of miss that. But also like what that escalation scale looks like for advocates and kind of watching that play out, that looks different on the local level versus the federal level as well. Conversations are able to move people, and information is able to move people in a way that it's just not at the state and at the federal level. And like door knocking in somebody's, door knocking with constituencies that are influential to people, spreading information with the public, building those coalitions. You see the return on that so much faster at the local level than in federal work. So in that way, it's extremely gratifying. I guess that's more of a shift from having the focus of my work being primarily federal to it being primarily local. But I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that we're able to see that tangible change. And we're definitely losing fights for sure too. We just lost good cause also. That's another one that happened here too. That's a state bill, and we were very engaged on that one and really, really wanted it. And we were so close. Last year we were not close. Delegate Janelle Wilkins has been bringing this for years. Last year, we got, like, we just keep getting closer and closer and closer. And this year we thought this was going to be it. And then it just wasn't, but we're going to keep fighting. And, but each of those levels down of government, federal to state to local, the progress that we're able to see is more tangible and more achievable.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so we'll do a round for this closure question of the prepared stuff, and then we're going to open it up to the audience just for folks to give you all a heads up. What advice would you give to DSA chapters or local organizers that are starting to think about organizing governing coalitions like this, and with socialists and allied folks in office on moving housing policy and other issues like that?
Who is that addressed to? Because you broke up at the beginning.
Oh, I apologize. That's to you, if you don't mind.
Oh, great. Yeah, I mean, well, having just lost an election, I guess I have lots of advice about it. But, well, no, I mean, I think that one of the things that's been very kind of clear to me is that how important it is. I think most of us here are in DSA, and we know that there's a lot of different. DSA is a broad organization that has a lot of different focuses. We have folks who are working, very focused on labor issues, folks who are very focused on housing directly, folks who do electoral work, and I think one of the things that I've been frustrated by is the silos between those different groups, and that it's really not to anyone's benefit when we have those silos up, because, and I don't say that just as someone who would like the folks who are doing labor organizing, tenant organizing to come knock on doors for me, though I would like that. It's also because I need to understand, as someone who does electoral work, we also need to understand how having that separate non-electoral labor and tenant organizing is so critical for getting our priorities passed, right? That in Berkeley we've had a progressive majority, but not a DSA majority on the city council since 2016. And because the coalitions of people that put that progressive majority on the council have not been sufficiently engaged in those other kinds of organizing and the kind of real accountability, though that progressive majority has both not stood up for the things they were elected for and drifting to the right. And so I think breaking down those barriers between the tenant organizing, labor organizing, the electoral organizing, and all the other things that DSA does is really, to everyone's benefit. It's not just everyone's benefit, it's critical for everyone. Right? Because the folks who are doing labor organizing and tenant organizing are going to have a lot harder of a time if we can't pass legislation to help them. And we're going to have a lot harder of a time passing legislation to help them if we don't have those groups organized in order to demand that when we do either elect just the DSA caucuses in the minority or actual progressive, strong and actual progressive majorities to our core bodies. And so I don't know if I have a solution as much as an important problem, which I think many of you are aware of. But that is something that I've been thinking about a lot over the past couple of weeks, and how do we really build towards a place where those different kinds of work within DSA are complementing each other rather than kind of splitting each other off.
Thank you, Commissioner. Let's go to Assemblymember Marcela.
Yeah, I think the first thing is just understanding that organizing governing coalitions is a different beast that we're taking on. And I say that because it's not easy. We are the socialists. We are the ones, and I say this like within my own legislative body, we are the moral compass of the body, right? And that's not always easy, being the first one out. But that to say that there's a lot of complementary work that needs to happen here, where the skills that are developed within the electoral organizing work, to help a candidate, those are skills that can be transferred into something else, right? So it's the leadership that you're building, it's the trust and the relationships that you're building. And so that's something that we need to figure out how to transition with, right? And so it's not, we have some structures in place that we've been able to develop because of this enormous project that we're taking on, but it's a constant challenge, right? It's setting up a type of steering committee that is working as a funnel of information to the larger group and its branches, and the information coming up and making sure that there's representation in that working group that is working and communicating directly with the elected officials as well. Yeah, and I think that one of the more challenging things that we are still in New York City still really struggling with is how to disseminate information, not just from like us in Albany in the legislature as things are moving down to folks, but also that folks on the ground can kind of like funnel information up. And it has to be done in a way that's quick, because sometimes we just have a short time period where we need to activate folks. Yeah, so very interesting project, but we're still working on the kinks, definitely.
Definitely, yeah. If we had it all figured out, we could just stay home and play guitar, whatever it is that we like to do. So next, Councilmember Kristin, and just to restate, because I know my signal broke up a little bit, but basically, what advice would you give to DSA chapters or local organizers starting to think about making these governing coalitions together with socialists and other allied folks?
Yeah, I mean, coming from a place where there are a lot of different advocates, a lot of different nonprofits doing, issue-based work as well as electoral work, a part of it is like finding the right space, making sure that, you wanted the work to be symbiotic and make sure that we're, that we're creating those bridges and those lines of communication. And that we're also like respecting leaders who are already exist in particular spaces and particular issue areas, making sure that that we are showing up with and for them, and that helps others to show up with and for others, so that we kind of grow this large continuum. No one is going to be the leader for every issue area and in every space. Sometimes you have multiple leaders in one issue area because someone's going to specialize in outreach to this community, someone's going to specialize in outreach to this community, someone specializes in research on this particular issue area. And there has to be a lot of listening, and that can be hard. I'm sure we've all seen that like go down in messy ways in progressive spaces. And so it's always, just sometimes it's taking a step back to really make sure that we're getting kind of a good view of what the dynamics are if we're new to a space, especially. But even if we're not, and also we're always trying to bring in new people then who need to make sure that they're kind of understanding the space that they're coming into, that they're being respectful of that space, and they understand the dynamics here. And like, even like, okay, who's the main point of contact for the elected? Right, that can be I'm putting back my my organizing hat again, but like questions like that, like this, when it comes to different fights, even that can be contentious. So I absolutely second everything that my counterparts have said, but adding on to that, in these spaces where there's a lot of organizing already happening, making sure that we're being really sensitive and that we're showing up to others' fights. These fights are all not every fight, obviously, but the progressive ones that we stand behind, that we're showing up for those in in the capacity that we have. And it's not going to be, we're not going to be able to canvass for every single fight and go all the way. Maybe it's just a sign-on letter. Maybe it's we'll send somebody to testify, whatever it is. But we are showing that solidarity, the same as we're asking for others as we continue to grow the coalition and those relationships.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for that wealth of knowledge and great advice. So we're going to move on to some of the audience questions. Thank you all. There's a lot of them. A lot of them are really great. So we're going to open it up. And basically, I'm going to state the question. And if y'all don't mind, just kind of like jumping in if it feels appropriate to you all, because there's a lot of food for thought with some of these. So the first one, in places around the country like Cincinnati, there are good tenant rights on paper, but you have to bring or credibly threaten to bring a lawsuit, etc. So functionally, there are no rights. And lots of other places, tenants' rights aren't even available as affirmative things you can ask for, but only defenses to evictions, right? You're just mitigating the disaster and slowing down the car crash. I've seen that many times. Can you speak to regulatory targets for how we can better enforce tenant rights? And I see Soli's hands up.
Yeah, this is going to be first, it's a very brief but unsatisfying answer, which is that one of the best ways to enforce tenant rights around habitability and repair work and all those things is rent control, which is really great. But of course, in most of our states, rent control is banned, right? And that's one of the, one of the big problems is that, in Berkeley, the way we enforce the tenant's right to a habitable unit is a tenant comes to the rent board and says, my landlord hasn't fixed my stove for 3 months. And we say, okay, well, you're getting a rent reduction retroactive to when they first notified the landlord and prospective until the landlord fixes the issue and proves it to the rent board, because that is a reduction in housing services. And so we're reducing your rents proportionally, right? And so there is a direct correlation between a landlord's income and their failure to provide housing services. If we don't have rent control, we can't do that, right? We can only set rents per unit if we have rent control. And so the other way to really make sure that, because exactly as the person addressed, if I have to go out and find a lawyer to fix my problem, it's a much, much harder, and especially much harder if I'm working class, don't have access to pay for an attorney or the time to do it. And so if you don't have rent control, one of the great alternatives is right to counsel, right? And really funding of community organizations that are going to provide legal services. So in Berkeley, we have both the rent board and the city fund the East Bay Community Law Center and the Eviction Defense Center, which provide resources to help represent low-income tenants when they do have those problems. And all of our staff know if we have a problem and we can't help someone, refer them to those services. So, the number one kind of gold standard is rent control, with a rent board that can enforce people's rights through rent reductions. And then kind of number two is making sure that if there isn't that option, you have public funding for those nonprofit attorneys.
Yeah. Chicago doesn't have rent control, but it's known for having decent rent rights. And literally earlier this week, I was working at the tenant unit, had to announce a lawsuit for retaliation.
We just passed at the state level the Tenant Safety Act 1117. I say we at the state level. It's obviously not my bill, but county level. But I was glad to send my tenants in my district to go advocate for that. But that is basically a rent escrow reform bill, and it's going to go into effect later this year. So we're trying to get all our get lawyered up and get ready to figure out how we can advise our folks to do that. But that's I mean, this is I can't even tell you how much of my life, my elected life, I spend playing whack-a-mole with these asshole slumlords who just truly cannot be managed because the citations do nothing. Like I was saying before, I mean, I have combed through, not just my whole staff, we have combed through like every ounce of code at the county and state level to be like, what are we missing? But everything ends in fines and fees, So yes, we need to be able to sue. We need to be able to sue as a government. So that is something that we are working on. Landlords right now are exempted from consumer protection. So we're working on, that's one angle that we're looking at, but hoping to use escrow as another tactic. And in the meantime, like constituent issues are a huge deal in my office for many, many reasons. A lot of that just is tenant stuff, habitability issues. And we are all over those, like we are up their asses. And that is, that is honestly what has resulted in the owners of this one building that's really hard, like they're selling now. So we're trying to pass legislation that shouldn't be, like this should not be the method, just kind of harassing them about every single, maintenance issue that they haven't attended to. But that is what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I'll just add, in New York, we do actually have a vast array of like city and state agencies that can help with enforcement. They're not great and they're not perfect, but the truth is, I think that we need to do a better job of educating ourselves and educating the tenants on their rights first, because there's a misunderstanding and a misconception that if I'm renting from a landlord, that it's his property, so he gets the right to choose, right? And in New York City, we have very different types of housing. And so one, most tenants don't know what type of housing they live in, right? They don't know the difference between rent control and rent stabilization. They don't know how their Section 8 works, right? And so we have housing court, which I encourage people to sue their landlords all the time. I encourage them to not pay rent. When they get sued for non-payment, bring up the warrant of habitability. The right to counsel was an amazing, amazing, amazing program that started in the city, and we're fighting to expand it statewide. New York City also has the ability to make 311 complaints against your landlord. It's a record that's there. You can use it in housing court. HCR is a Human Rights Commission. You can call them and make complaints about income discrimination. We're talking about the vast people that are applying for Section 8 vouchers. And the problem in New York City is you have landlords, you have supers, and you have the real estate agents telling people that they don't take programs, they don't take these types of rental subsidies. And that is illegal and it's also wrong. But the problem is, unless we make complaints, the landlords will continue to think that they can get away with it and blatantly lie to us and break the law in front of us. And so just to add one more is DHCR, which is a state agency. You can do rent reductions, you can do harassment complaints, you can ask for repairs. And also we have the public advocate who does the worst landlords list. We try and organize and, raise those 311 complaint numbers so that we can, one of the best ways to get them to behave well is to shame them and show everyone the bad behavior that they're doing.
Right. For better or worse, a lot of that works. Cool. So the next audience question, and again, hop in and answer as you see fit. What is the role of building tenant unions in the fight for housing justice? Right. There's a resurgence of labor organizing in recent years that's seen a co-organizing relationship between unions, institutions like labor notes and EWOC, and elected officials at all levels. Right. Are tenant-led tenant unions central to this fight in the way that labor unions are? And what role do you see for elected officials, legislative campaigns, et cetera, playing the role in that process of tenant class formation? Great question.
I'm just going to jump right in. I think the role of tenant unions is to help shift the balance of power, right? Like we are already starting off in a negative with these landlords. And so I think the building of tenant power is just so beautiful to see. I've organized tenants, helped them fight back. Something simple as getting repairs. And then it's like a switch goes on, right? They've learned how to do this and now they're using those skills in other parts. And so I think that one of the things that we always say is like, we can't fight against landlord and their money because we just can't match them, but we have the people power. And I think that that's what we need to build on. And I think as elected officials, and at least my role as someone who was evicted from a rent stabilized apartment that I shared with my family for 30 years, and what that caused is an example of what we can do and what we can accomplish, right? The fact that we are electing more legislators who are renters, right? To kind of like shift that imbalance of power.
Yeah, I mean, we see these types of like living situation based organizing tools with homeowners all the time, right? You've got your HOAs, you've got your like neighborhood civic associations, and they organize around like they want this stop sign or like whatever it is, or maybe they want to weigh in on zoning legislation or zoning text amendments, things like that. And so this is providing an organizing tool to our renters. I mean, absolutely fundamental to getting any kind of renter or tenant legislation passed. But not only that, but lots of other legislation that's impacting this community as well. I mean, it's a great organizing tool. So I second everything that Marcela said also.
Yeah, I mean, agree to all of that. I think also, specifically to the question of, are tenant unions the way? I don't think that, I think tenant unions look different in different contexts, right? In Berkeley, the Berkeley tenant union is not a traditional tenant union. It's more of like a organization of tenants throughout the city who support renters' rights, but it's not organized around particular buildings. Whereas the kind of more traditional tenant union is all the tenants in a building come together to organize for their interests around their, more like a traditional labor union, right? Around their living space rather than their workspace. I think that both are important, but what's most important is that it's tenants who are doing the organizing and tenants who are at the forefront, right? That I think we've had problems sometimes in California and in Berkeley where homeowners who support tenant rights have become too central in the leadership of these organizations. And while I appreciate their work, that is not their place. Like, it is not the place of homeowners to tell tenants how to organize or to direct tenants. They can, I'm not sectarian about it. Like, I welcome, working with homeowners and property owners. Well, rental property owners is a different kind of category, but homeowners are an important part of our movement, but they shouldn't be leading it. And I think that we have had situations where it's kind of driven some of our organizing off focus by having that kind of taking place. So, but I do also think that, yeah, as we've seen the kind of this surge of workplace organizing, I'm hoping that we see that surge as well in tenant spaces around direct building organizing, organizing all in one building, or as folks have mentioned in the comments, organizing across multiple buildings that have the same landlord or that have the same, housing management company. So you can work together to really put pressure on those organizations.
If I could just add on, that made me think of just one other thing to add there. So important that the impacted people are leading the fight in every fight, 100%. And in this case, for example, like, my office had been in there knocking doors along with, volunteers and other groups as well to connect. And so we had like, I've got like a text thread with like a bajillion, different tenants, and they can send their, maintenance issues or other questions or whatever. We have this open line of communication, but that's not an organizing infrastructure. That's like an elected or my office, and then the tenants. Like it's been critical for them to have their own leadership internally, for them to be able to come together and say, like, here's the things that we want and need, and then to present that to me and say, like, wait, we need you to help us like deliver that, as opposed to just like me kind of like conveying information or solving their whack-a-mole problem. So that's the ingredient that comes with an organized tenant association, formal or informal, is having that leadership internally.
So let's go to the next question. Tell us about institutions. What kinds of institutional designs seem to work for protecting tenant rights? Just a little bit what we were talking about earlier, and promoting housing justice, like with a diverse mix of approaches, including tenant organizing, rent boards, eviction proceedings, legal system, local or county agency processes, and funding for new affordable housing developments. Where are you most optimistic when it comes to institutions?
I can start off. I think that it's gonna be a different answer in every jurisdiction. Right? I mean, that's not a satisfying answer, but really, like, every city that I've been to, and we've all gotten to know each other. The folks on the panel, we've been at at gatherings together, and we've heard stories from different jurisdictions and in other places, and it's really remarkable how different, how similar, of course, all the struggles we all have are. It's still all capital fighting against the working people, and the battles are the same, but the battlegrounds are very different. And so, it's on the one hand, I kind of want to say, like, there's not one answer. Like, there are all sorts of different things, and especially because of state preemption and the big difference between states like California and New York, which have relatively permissive state legislatures when it comes to tenant law, versus some of not just red states, but other states throughout the country that don't. You're going to have a lot different tactics. That said, it's always better to have it public than to have it contracted out. That's not always possible. I mean, there are lots of really great nonprofit providers and nonprofit agencies, but personally, I think that having it be directly in-house where it can be oversight and there's better unionization rules is always going to be better. But also, the closer it is to, as Kristin mentioned, the closer it is to the people who are directly impacted, the better it's going to be. So in Berkeley, we've been able to have such a strong rent board because it's elected directly by our tenant supermajority city. And so, not every city is going to be able to have an elected rent board. But if you live in California and you're in a charter city, you can totally have an elected rent board if you want. Well, you're going to have to organize a charter amendment and get it on your ballot and pass it. But if you can do that, then you'll have a board that's directly responsive to the people of your city.
I guess one thing I wanted to quickly chime in, because maybe it's relevant, is I think there are institutions, like, I think sometimes, frankly, maybe this is a spicy take or whatever, maybe it's not, but like a lot of even progressive officials talk about affordable housing. We have a housing issue, let's create affordable housing. And I'm sure you all are probably familiar, that's typically a nonprofit, private partner, public partnership with low-income housing tax credits, and it's like income restricted and all of this stuff. And that seems to be what people really rest on, especially because you can make the argument that, like, oh, I'm putting more dollars for this or less dollars for this. And there's many institutions where it is amount of like a number, like a degree of resources and money and things like this. For instance, with right to counsel, one of the sort of ways that previous bills of ours in Illinois was watered down is, like, we had an omnibus bill. They watered it down to just right to counsel, but they also intentionally underfunded it in a pilot program in Chicago. So it would be kind of essentially intended to fail. It wasn't super effective what it was doing because it didn't have a lot of money, but it was doing a very good, a good thing. But of course, I know many people in that institution, and they said, well, it's nice that we have rights of counsel, we can show up to the court, but it would also be nice to have rights to give people and to offer when they show up. So I think when it comes to institutions, I feel like we have to be, at least my experience, a little careful when they just try to make it about institutions that need more or less funding, and the affordable housing industry. Next question is two related questions together from two audience members. A, elected officials face different circumstances and pressures in offices at different levels with widely varying support and resources. Can you speak to some of the pressures you've faced or seen and share ideas of how can we as a community of democratic socialist organizers help so the work of building working class power through governance is effective? And I think maybe this is related. What can DSA chapters do to be better members of organizing coalitions? Can I call someone out? All right. I see.
I mean, succumbing to peer pressure, but then I saw Marcela come off mute too.
Yeah, you can
Marcela?
go first if you want. It's up to you. I can go first. Okay.
No, by all means, go ahead.
So where do I start? So the advantage that I feel that I had as an incoming legislator is I had already done 10 years of organizing and advocacy and lobbying work up here in New York and Albany. So that was super helpful. However, when you get here, you really, well, first of all, it's a 2-year term, right? So you get here and you have to figure out how everything works. And then as you're just starting to learn, you have to now do a re-election. But I say that because a lot of what I see is people don't have the support and the infrastructure. There's just too many things happening, and that's on purpose. Everything is dictated by the Speaker in the Assembly. Who gets the chairmanship, who's in those committees, right? I'm not surprised. I am not in the housing committee, right? Being told that there's a wait list for it, but then finding out that 2 other people that came in my same class are in it, and someone that came in a newer class is in it. This is all intentional, right? And so it feels like there's a way of isolation so that you have nothing to do but to ask for help, right? So that you're weak. And so I think that that's one of the things that we have to figure out as legislators, how we're going to stand on our own. But the other thing that I would say also is, because I've been on the other side, right? I helped elected somebody, and I know, the stuff that stuff happens and the pressures that they get, and I still haven't figured that out. We have to find a way of protecting the elected official, because the elected official is the first one that gets hit with the target, right? But they're attacking me as an individual, but really they're attacking my community who I'm representing. So I think that's kind of what we need to understand. And this again goes to the needing to create that structure to funnel information down and up quickly so that it's happening in real time, right? And I think that the other thing is, and this is also again challenging, where folks from just everyday folks, even folks that are involved, really don't understand the way government works, right? And so we've been able to take important principle stands and vote no against things, but it's going to come to a point where I can't keep playing that card, right? It was very difficult for me to vote on part of the budget because of the watered down good cause did and the damages and them attempting to roll back some of the wins that we got in 2019. And then I had to be reminded by an attorney that I used to work with that I shouldn't be so hard on myself, that even though it wasn't everything that we wanted, that there still are some wins. And in government work, that means that we pass what we can and then you continue to fight to make things better. But that's not, for folks, that everyday folks that are hurting, that's just not enough. And so there is constantly a conflict, right? And I think that the other thing that I'm seeing here is, that there's this idea that we're a family, like we're going to work together, we're going to protect you. You have an opponent, oh yes, right? There's this illusion, but it's really like a one-sided relationship, right? And so that's going to be a constant struggle, and that's because we cannot work within the system that we're in. We have to dismantle the whole thing and build it back up.
Well, I mean, I don't know how you top that. Well said. Well said. Yeah, I mean, assistance with educating the public is one of the most useful things that advocates do, I think, in this space, because it's impossible to have enough staff to do that job, and so many of our fights become more winnable once the public understands, and if we're able to overcome whatever propaganda might be put out by the other side. And what we have on our side is the people, the volunteers, the legwork. We have the ability to reach people because we have people, and so that kind of assistance is incredibly important. And we've got people who are, who live in other people's districts, who can be talking to, their neighbors and those groups, and knocking on those doors and making those connections. And so, that's incredibly vital. But also, to Marcela's point, I'm going to underscore like the understanding that like we have to do and say some things that aren't perfect, because now we're in this space. Like, I have colleagues that I have to work with, and we're going to work together on other things. Like we do, it's not like there's party line votes here. Everybody is a registered Democrat who's sitting in these seats, but we have split, we do 6-5 votes all the time. And it's not always the same 6 and the same 5. Like, it crosses all over the place. So it's really, really important for me to maintain relationships. And it's this constant balance of like, I'm always trying to check myself and make sure that, my staff and my allies and my comrades, that we're all, that I'm being checked also, but that we're on the same side here. I'm not going to be able to be perfect because there's, I don't love incrementalism. Nobody does, but sometimes it's better to pass the thing than to not pass the thing. And it's that balance that we're trying to strike. It's difficult.
Yeah. As I just want to add, as someone who's also worked as staff in an office, definitely seeing that the importance of that. And I think that's why it's really interesting, this question about coalition and the role of the organization, the role of the movement versus the role of the legislator, right? And I think a clear demarcation. I think, and if I may add, like in 2019, we actually, the Rent Control Coalition, we had a referenda. We had an advisory referenda that was like, we put it in gentrifying communities in 12 different wards. There's 50 wards in Chicago. We put them in 12. And we're like, would you like, the ability to regulate rents? And it was like, boom, nowhere did it get less than 70% support. And it was like, whoa, that's crazy. It's not a, that's a popular idea. And then lo and behold, a lot of the same organizer from that campaign ended up being elected to city council. There were the next year 6 Democratic Socialists on the city council. We had more than 10% representation in Chicago. And it was like, whoa, what do we do now? And I think one thing that I noticed is that once you've achieved that level of power, I think there could sometimes be a tendency, especially if organizers try to maybe lean on elected officials to do quite a bit, and maybe more than even their position would be as effective in. Like, I think you still need a whole crowd of people outside City Hall with, their, pitchforks or whatever, being like, we need this, we need that, and legislators being able to come and being like, hey, look, what's going on out there? We should probably do something about that. And that's maybe a trite way of understanding it, but like having a level of sophistication as we build power, I think our ideas about our roles in coalitions has to sophisticate and mature as well. And these sort of tensions, questions about accountability are inevitable and natural, but I think with time and experience, sharing experiences like this, I think we can all learn quite a bit. I've learned quite a bit. And with that, we have about 5 minutes left. So I think I'm going to go ahead and see, we're doing on the questions. Do time maybe for one more, and this one's an interesting one, I think, recently, at least for me, and this is actually directed towards you, Kristin. because the question is for Kristin. Our local chapter ran a social housing campaign built on the Montgomery County model and sought to start a housing finance authority / social housing authority. But the city government wants a neoliberal solution, right? They want to put money into the existing nonprofits. So how do we push social housing, the vision for social housing, when we have competitors that seem neutral and are kind of beloved in the political community, et cetera? How do we deal with that dynamic?
I mean, public ownership is what allows us to really have that accountability and provide that accountability. So, this partners are important, and that's a method that we have at our disposal now also that we certainly use and leverage. But we're thinking about what's our long-term goal. I do think that's where we have to be going, is having the ability to have that public ownership. And that's the model that we see working at larger scales in other places. Vienna, I'm sure that everybody has taken a look at. Maybe that's an example of incrementalism, but I was just putting in the chat, the incrementalism debate is a tricky one because you have to be careful that it's not being stood up as a method of preventing you from doing something better. If the better thing is achievable, you have to hold your cards and wait. And so that's the debate, and that's always the strategy question. Is this truly the best we can get anytime soon, or is this being put forward as a way to stymie the organizing and make it impossible to attain something better? I mean, that's exactly what happened, of course, when we introduced our stabilization bill, is that the opposing bill was introduced purporting to do a similar thing, but just a little easier on the developers and landlords. But really, functionally, it was so weak that it was basically nothing, and it was being put there to prevent ours from passing. So we can't settle for that one. And so I think that's a similar question that we're looking at here. And for folks who are interested in the Housing Production Fund and what we're doing in Montgomery County, I will note that also in the state session there was just a bill passed as well to increase funding to housing authorities in local jurisdictions. And so that is something to look at the state level as well, pairing that. That'll go into effect, I think, next year or later this year. And hoping that we get a big windfall that will help us to really accelerate our pace of building here at the local level.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in with something kind of a little bit more broad to what Kristin is talking about in terms of compromise. And I think that this applies outside of just that conversation about housing. But, I think it's both important for the elected officials who are here on the panel and who might be in the audience, and also for the activists and just rank and file members, that accountability is a two-way street around when we're when Kristin is negotiating for her bills at the county level and Marcela is negotiating at the state level. We need you need to hold us accountable so that we know that we're going to stand up and demand the best thing. But we also need to have your trust so that when we tell you, hey, we can't win anything more, this is as far as we can go and we do need to compromise now, we need to make sure that there's mutual trust and understanding so that we can all feel confident that when we do settle, we settled for something that was possible. And I think this is true in the labor space and in the electoral space, right? As a member of a labor union, one of the great things that my labor union did was implement open bargaining so that members were confident that their bargaining team was getting the best deal that they could. And when the bargaining team came back and said, we don't think that we can get any better, where do we compromise? Where do we draw the line? They knew that it was the right time to compromise. And I think it's true also both for electeds and members. And that means that as electeds, we need to make sure that we're bringing everyone along and making sure that they see what's going on and understand what's going on. It's our job as the experts to educate and to provide that clarity of the context. And then it's on the members to really fully engage and say, yes, we understand that you fought as hard as you can, and here's where we're willing to compromise, here's where we're not willing to compromise, so that at the end of the day, we can end up taking our wins or our losses or whatever they may be, and then coming back around and fighting for more the next time around. It's that two-way street. That's what co-governance is. It's mutual accountability.
So I don't have anything to add, but to say we have two amazing panelists I'm going to honor tonight. But I also do want to remind people, sorry, three, yes, three.
Oh.
We're organizing. This is a marathon and not a sprint. Real change takes time. This is emotional work, and we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and that we have time to heal. Like for me, being part of this panel with amazing folks with the DSA fund is fuel to my soul for everything else that I have to deal with it. And then, organizing, there is no straight way to organize. What might have worked for me now doesn't mean that it's going to work for me tomorrow again, right? And so this is trial and error. We're going to do our work. We're going to pause. We're going to analyze, and we're going to pivot when needed. And I'm just very, very appreciative to be in this space with everyone.
Excellent. Thank you all. An incredible panel. Thank you all so much, the three of you. Thank you all of the attendees, participants who are watching and sent in amazing questions. There's so much I learned tonight. I'm sure everybody else has learned a lot tonight too. And we're building this movement one by one, right? The sort of atomic unit is the connection between human beings. And here we are, the 42 of us building this thing together. So thank you. Someone is going to put a donation link into the chat. This is the DSA fund. Could use some support. So if you got a couple extra ducats lying around, go ahead, click the link and throw it in the proverbial hat. And yeah, look out for this has all been recorded. So look out for a follow-up email with a recording. It's a nice discussion. So please check it out, make a contribution, get involved. Let's take the lessons that we've learned tonight and go run with them in wherever position that we are. Quick shout out to, again, our panelists. Thank you so much, Commissioner Soli, Assemblymember Marcela, Councilmember Kristin. So wonderful to meet you. Our co-sponsors, the DSA Fund, who and folks who helped behind the scenes put this together: David DeHalday, Brandon West, Maria Svarts, James Tierney, Sunshine Royanian Lutter, Chris Rio, and Max Shaw from the DSA Fund. Again, thank you everybody for a wonderful evening. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your night.